What is going on, good people? We got confused. We didn't know who was going to host this one. So we're both hosting it, even though that doesn't really work because we can't talk. Well, we can talk over each other, but it's just. Anyway, uh, we're coming back to do a little, I don't want to say review, but kind of talk about the Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit 2-part special that they just had on, I think it's on Vice's YouTube channel. I know it was on a bunch of different channels, but I think Vice is the original one that does the Dark Side of the Ring specials, which are actually really good if you get a chance to watch any of them. I watched the Chris Benoit one, the New Jack, and the Montreal Screwjob one. So those three were
That's
really
one I
good.
want. I still want to watch the Montreal Screwjob one. I watched the one on Mula. That was another one that I got a chance to watch when I was seeing.
I still want to watch that one. Um, but yeah, it's definitely it gives you a different side of like all the story. Like we've heard about the Montreal Screwjob, for example, like how many thousands of times, but now you got a little bit more backstage access to like what was leading up to it, what happened, things like that. I also watched the Brawl for All one. That one was
That's another one I wanted to watch. Yeah.
that was the stupidest idea WWE ever had. Um, but
Besides
which is
putting the title on Brock multiple times, you think?
no, the Brawl for All was worse. Brawl for All was worse. It literally shortened people's careers. Brawl for All was worse. Um, but anyway, um, so we wanted to talk specifically about the probably the biggest one so far is the Chris Benoit 2-night special, or not 2-night special, but 2-part special, I should say. Um, I thought it was really good. I thought it was very well put together. I liked the interviews that they had. They had Vicky Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Dean Malenko's wife, a bunch. I'm trying to remember everyone that was on it. There's so many different people that you kind of got to get a different side of what happened and actually got to hear people actually talk about it because I feel like this happened back in 2007. So over 10 years, what is it, like 13 years, something like that, 13 years. And really no one has actually just sat down and talked about it. It's been this dark cloud over professional wrestling for 13 years. And I mean, it still is, but I think talking about it and kind of getting the stories out helps a lot. um, and I feel like we learned some more things that we didn't really know because um, similar to what's going on right now with the coronavirus, you only really hear what the media is telling you, and the media always wants the worst case scenario. They're fear mongering and everything like that. Whereas, you know, with this special, you got a little bit of the other side of that, like what really happened, what was going on leading up to the incident, um, what Chris Benoit was going through mentally, physically, which I don't think a lot of people really thought about. Not saying that that is makes what happened okay, but you kind of think a little bit more of okay, that kind of adds up a little bit more. Again, not saying that it makes what happened okay, but it gives you another thought about it. Um, any initial thoughts on the special, DJ?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I think this special did, and I think a lot of them do, um, you know, is it almost gives like a neutral feel to things. It gives a neutral description of who he was, how he was, kind of, the type of not only competitor he was, but person he was, before everything transpired. I think, um, especially with a lot of, you know, murder mysteries and like conspiracy theories and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of times where you don't get to get that neutral side until, and usually it takes years and years later when they finally do a documentary on it. You know, if you were, because something before this came out, and it may have, no, I don't think it was the previews of it that made me think of it, but before this came out, something just made me think about Chris Benoit, and then I started looking stuff up, and you know, I started. It was probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I started. And it may have been when they started promoting this, but I started looking stuff up, and it just like it brings you back to that time almost. This is what was crazy. Like even just watching this, it was like whoa. You know, it's like it made it feel like it was just yesterday that all of this happened and how crazy it was. Um, you know, I like the interviews that they had. You know, having especially like somebody like Chavo, who was obviously really close to him and Eddie. You know, having Vicky Guerrero, who I think we forget how close they were, to be honest, because nobody ever talks about it. Everybody has, you know, people have talked to Chavo, people have talked to Chris Jericho, people have talked to even Dean Malenko at times. But like Vicky Guerrero, I haven't heard a lot from her about it. I think she even said this was one of the first kind of sit down interviews she's done on, you know, on the entire situation. What I liked was the people who were interviewed were real about it, but they weren't malicious about it at the same time. You know, they were real about, yeah, he's a killer. Yeah, you know, he did some horrible things. Yeah, you know, if he wanted, somebody even said if he wanted to take his own life, that would have been different than him, you know, taking 3 lives in the process. But at the same time, you know, we got to hear a little bit more about him and his attitude, and kind of even some of the personal stuff that I think sometimes you don't get to hear about, you know, the fights and the arguing. And it's always interesting too, especially in stuff like this, because I'm like fascinated with like murder mysteries and like stuff like this because I don't, I just kind of become a fascination of mine because it's just an interesting topic. And it's interesting, especially like seeing some of the text that everybody got, and you know, kind of seeing their responses to certain things that they were seeing that maybe now you're kind of like, I wish I would have done something then, but obviously, you know, hindsight being 2020, you know, you can't go back. So, you know, especially when they talk about, you know, the text that Chavo got, and then who else got it? It wasn't John Laurinaitis. It was I can't remember who else it was, but 2 people got the same text about the dogs or whatever. I don't, and I mean, it's one of those scenarios that I don't even think there was anything that they could do. You know, I think when he sent that text, the deed was already done at that point. Um, you know, and it just I think I enjoy watching documentaries in general, but stuff like this that's kind of mysterious in a way. You know, because somebody could pass and then you get the documentary and you know a little bit more about it. But I think the media was all over, and you even saw it in the documentary, was all over WWE for everything and everything and everything, and all over him for everything and everything and everything. And I think, and rightfully so, that is their job. But I think on the other hand, we never got to hear the other side of the story, which I think this documentary did.
Yeah, there was so much, I think, more to the story that the media, was like, oh, it was a double murder suicide, he's a monster, blah, 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 like, condemning pro wrestling and everything. And it's like, there's way more to it, way more to it. And this opened up more of what could have been part of it. Um, for example, they were talking about how, when Eddie died, Chris took it so hard, because they were like best friends, which I never really realized they were that close, which was new to me. But that also you have to take into consideration, his mental state from that was not good. And I almost think, again, hindsight being 2020, but could WWE have done something? Could WWE have, because people realized he wasn't the same. Like, he wasn't acting the same that he was. He was, he was a different person, and they said that in this documentary. Is there something WWE could have done to help in any way, whether it was, um, therapy or some sort of rehab, something?
Yeah,
Because there was clearly was something that was noticeable that was wrong.
yeah. I think too. And I think a lot of men especially struggle with this, but I think I don't know if Chris Benoit knew because he was such an emotionless type of a person, especially in terms of what he did from day to day. Um, so I wonder if he really knew how to grieve. I wonder if he really knew how to live. Like, I don't know. I don't think he understood how to live life without that best friend there. You know,
Yeah.
um, and I think that's one of the things that I wonder about too with this and everything that transpired. You're asking, could WWE have helped? And I don't know if they could have. I don't know if they would have, you know, been able to take the necessary steps because even though certain people saw him differently and we, but these at the time I think were current guys with him, right? Like I'm pretty sure. So Vince or somebody who may have been in an administrative position, maybe they may not have seen as much, especially when you stop seeing because they said a lot that he was kind of in and out. It's kind of like come in, do your work, go leave. So and I think from what it sounded like, it sounded a lot like he was trying to spend more time with his family, which I think ultimately may have been the downfall on all of it. Um, you know, it seemed like he was trying to spend more time with his family to kind of take his mind off of everything. But I still think it's almost still a mystery. It's almost still a mystery to why all of this happened because there is no true motive. There is no true like, oh, we saw this coming. Like he acted different, but nobody saw it getting to that extreme. Um, I mean, I think the closest thing they said was it was something to do with an argument that he had with Nancy uh, soon before. But then again, even that's it's easy to attribute that to what happened afterwards after the fact. So
Yeah.
it's still a mystery. It's eerie. Um, I don't think anybody's really done an Eddie Guerrero documentary either. It was interesting to even hear, kind of the way everything ended in that way too, because I think that hasn't been talked about a lot. We hear a lot about him. You hear a lot of positive things about him, about who he was, but nobody's like dove into his struggles either. Um, and I hope that that's something that they maybe even Vice does. I don't know. I feel like that would be hard for because it's kind of the same group that will be talking about him. To bring that same group up and try to get another painful memory for them to recall. But I don't know. This like I said, it's still a mystery. It's still you know all of it's just bad and just sad all at the same time. And like I said, it just watching it took me back to that time, and I wasn't even that old at the time. I mean, I was like teenage years or whatever, but like it's not like it's like there's certain things during that period of time that just kind of just go over your head and you just don't even remember anymore. But this, you'll never forget it. When Eddie died, you'll never forget it.
Yeah.
That feeling, that thought of it. And then I think because both of these guys passed kind of in the same, within 2 years of each other, it almost, I think, as wrestling fans, it made us think, who's next? Like
Yeah.
it made it feel like it was like a common occurrence because there was a point where like wrestlers where it had been, in the indies, mainstream, whatever, were just it was like a they were passing like it was nothing, like, and all
Yeah.
from like the same thing. And then of course WWE, came out with their wellness policy and all that, um, to kind of help. But I think too, and I don't want to get too long with it here, but I think too, you know, hearing from his son, I think was the biggest thing. Because I think you and I have talked kind of off camera a little bit about his son and kind of what he wants to do and him trying to get into wrestling. I don't, I think he's in wrestling, but it's, I wonder who would take that chance, on him just with that connection. Because even he kind of talked about how he was treated, after the fact, even to this day, kind of how he's treated. Um, it kind of broke his family apart a little bit. Um, and obviously he's wanting to wrestle under the name Chris Benoit Jr. too. That comes into play as well. It's just, and he looks just like him. Like he looks just like it's crazy. Like the dude looks just like him. Like you can tell he's his son. It's like it's wild. Um, but like it was interesting to hear from him, and hear from Nancy's side of the family too. Um, you know, but it was interesting because this was a time that like really broke him down. I think
Yeah.
being his son, and even when you hear about Nancy's side of the family too, broke them down to the point where they were close at one point, and then they kind of separated, and then because of the documentary Chris Jericho and whatnot, they came back together. But it's just I want to see more of what Vice does because Vice does some good stuff anyway. Some of the other stuff that's not wrestling related, some of the other documentary type stuff is always really good. I want to see what else they do. They also did a little podcast or something after the fact too. Kind of a little bit of an extra, type thing about the situation. But I think this was a good way to start the second season because I don't think there's any wrestling fan that doesn't know unless you're just really young. Unless you're just really young, and I know people have tried to keep it under wraps. They've tried to act like it never happened. They've tried to act like he doesn't exist, but there's no getting away from it. There's if you're probably I don't know, at least probably 10 and up, you probably know about it. Because and it's hard to even say that because nobody talks about it. Nobody asks about it. Nobody says, "Hey, do you remember Chris Benoit and how good he was?" Nobody says anything about it. So, it's hard to even say what the age group would be to where it kind of cuts off, and you don't know who he is.
Yeah. And
If there is an age group that doesn't know, because it's possible everybody knows. Um,
and I feel like also, getting their side of the story too. I like that, in the beginning, like they still said like, they gave him the respect that as a performer he deserves because no matter what happened, you cannot deny he was one of the best professional wrestlers ever. You know, I feel like that's something you can't take away because that's his body of work. Uh, and with me, I personally try to separate what happened with before. Like I still loved him as a professional wrestler. I loved his matches. Everything like that. One of the best technical wrestlers ever. But again, what he did was terrible. But they still said, he they gave him the respect for his career, and even Chavo said, it's terrible what happened, and he would never condone what happened, but he's still they're still brothers in a way. Like I like that he said that because you know we really don't know what happened. Like you said, we don't know what happened, and apparently it was over a 2 or 3 day period. And they were saying, "Oh, well, he had to have been in his right mind to at least write the suicide note or whatever. Not necessarily. There are people who still have mental breakdowns and have a little bit to write something, but still don't realize what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could possibly be he could have no idea what he was doing. He just and they even said, he had severe CTE. They I think at one point they had said his brain looked like the brain of like a 70-year-old or something like that. Um, and that's just all the brain damage. So even though he had the wherewithal to write that note, he still may have not, known what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He may not have known. He may not have known who he was at
Yeah,
like.
I think too. The way that they said it transpired, over the 3 day period, and him, like, everybody within the family who lived there was dead, but he was still like in the house. It almost like seems like he had some sort of remorse, but then he went too far, so he didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
Because I because it almost sounds like he was in some sort of rage. If you try to like rationalize it, which it's irrational and doesn't make any sense within itself, but it sounds like he did what he did, to Daniel and Nancy, and then he he it's like he woke up. It's like he woke up and he was like, that was a bad dream, and then he looks over and it's like it's not a dream. And then and this happens with a lot of um, you know killers and people who do really bad things. You're like, how do I get out of it? And then there's no way to get out of it. Even the route he took, it's still to this day, it's talked about. So you really didn't get out of it. So it's just, I don't know. It's kind of even hard to talk about, I think, because it's just one of those moments that just stick with you and not for
yeah,
the good.
yeah. And part of me like feels bad for the fact that he did go through that mental kind of breakdown, that snap, because even I think Chavo and Chris Jericho were saying, if you told him 13 years ago or 14 years ago that one day his entire career, and him as a person would be erased from history, it would have broken his heart because that's all he wanted to do. All he wanted to do since he was a kid was be a professional wrestler. That was his dream that he was living. Um, and really with the CTE, it is kind of his fault, but it's not. Yes, he probably shouldn't have been doing the flying headbutts and all that, but at the same time, that comes with professional wrestling. And yes, they've changed it now to like so there's not as many concussions, but there's still going to be concussions anyway. Like that's just the thing of any sort of physical activity, sport, whatever. Um, but that's just the fact that he would have been heartbroken if he knew like one of his actions would have completely erased him from the history books. Um, and not to everybody. Like I said, I still will go back on YouTube and watch old Chris Benoit matches. I will still watch matches. I was watching some of the matches of him and Eddie Guerrero in Japan the other night because I still respect his career. I still respect his in-ring work. I don't respect what happened, but I respect his in-ring work. And um, one of the things that was said at the end of the documentary that I kind of want to pose a question, not only to DJ but to anybody watching this, is um, I think it was his sister-in-law that was interviewed or something like that. I forgot how she was related to him, but she said that she can't forgive him right now, but one day she probably will be able to forgive him, because carrying around hate is a lot harder than, eventually forgiving. My question is, if she and the family can one day forgive him, should we be able to? Should the fans, should, and obviously, like Chavo said, he should never be in the WWE Hall of Fame. That's unfortunately a given. But if they are able to forgive him, his family is able to forgive him, should we?
I think I think yes. And obviously, it's a little bit easier for us kind of being outside of the situation in terms of being in it. But even in terms of um, you know tragedies that happen within your own family, you're supposed to, as hard as it is, forgive the person and not hold the grudge, even though it's not the easiest thing to do at all. So I think we should. But you know, in terms of will fans forgive him, it's kind of hard to say. I don't know. I guess it just depends on the fan. But should we? Yes, because really, in a way, we should live our lives in that way. That if a similar thing was to happen to us, as hard as it would be, it's better to forgive the person and try to move on from it than it is to keep it bottled in. Keep it. Which another thing that's good about the documentary is it keeps this from because a lot of these people haven't talked since for
Yeah.
14 years haven't talked about it. So
Yeah, and like you said, we're not a part of the family directly, but I feel like for a lot of people, like for me, for example, I know you're a little bit younger. You're a young whippersnapper, but like some of us grew up with these guys. Like literally grew up watching Chris Benoit, watching Chris Jericho, watching. So in a way, we're not. I don't want to say we're family, but you feel that connection with these people. Like, I'm sure there were professional wrestling fans who Chris Benoit was their hero. There were probably kids that looked up to him. And I think if the family is able to forgive him, not and I'm not saying everyone has to, but I think we should be able to if they can. Um, but also, I liked, like you said, we got to see the interview with his son. I don't know if he's still currently in professional wrestling or trying to. Um, but the fact that I think it was an AEW show they were at because Jericho was there. But the fact that he still loves wrestling, the fact that he still watches it, the fact that he even said his dad is still his hero. Like that was powerful. That was like wow.
and two,
You know?
he loves wrestling when, in a way, wrestling kind of turns back on him.
Yeah.
When you think about it. And if you don't understand, and this is probably my closing thought, but if you don't understand what Casey's saying about, we feel like we're family. If anybody was as hurt as most of us were early, in late January when Kobe passed, then you'll understand. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Um, and I think my final like closing thought before we kind of end this is because we're just about at the 30-minute mark. Is see, I feel like if he has that dream and still wants to be a professional wrestler or work in professional wrestling, fuck you if you say he can't or if you make him feel uncomfortable. Because yes, Chris Benoit was his father. Yes, something terrible happened. He can't control that. He didn't. He didn't have any control of what Chris did. So to tell him or to make him feel like he is not welcome in professional wrestling is bullshit. And I have no respect for anyone who acts like that. Um, hopefully, if he still wants to, hopefully Chris helps him. I hopefully Chris Jericho kind of helps him, maybe gives him a spot working in AEW. Again, I don't know if he is currently working in wrestling or what he's doing, but if he wants to, he should still be able to follow his dreams. He should still be able to do what he loves to do. That's just my personal opinion on it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before we kind of
Yeah,
close out.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's kind of all I have to say. I agree.
Good,
Very well said.
good addition there. But I think that's going to be pretty much it for this discussion. I'm sure we'll probably do a couple other Dark Side of the Ring discussions on a couple other episodes. There were a few good ones. Also, as soon as DJ watches it again, because he wants to kind of rewatch it, we're going to do our discussion on the Edge 24 special, which I thought was really good. And kind of, not that I didn't like Edge as much, because I've always loved Edge, but it brought back that love for Edge that I had. And kind of reminded me of how good he was, and like, because he is honestly one of the best ever. I don't think in like WWE, I don't think in some aspects he got to that level, like he was treated at that level, but he really was one of the best. And that special was really good. So we'll hopefully do that very soon, along with some other discussions. But we will be back as sometime in the near future couple days. I don't know when we'll be back. Also, if you haven't, go freaking watch the Big Show because it's amazing. It is fantastic. It's on Netflix. Go watch it. It's so good. Yes. But we will see you on the Dippity Dippity. Oh, yeah.